The train ride back to the city was quiet, but inside her chest, a storm brewed. Every bump on the track rattled her bones, but her resolve only hardened. She wasn't returning as the same broken girl who had fled in the night. She was returning with purpose. The reporter was waiting at the station, eyes wide with relief and anger. "You disappeared," he said, voice shaking. "Do you know what that did to me?" She swallowed her guilt but lifted her chin. "I'm sorry, but I'm here now, and I'm not running again." They walked through the city like shadows. Posters with her face still clung to walls, some praising her, others slandering her. She paused at one that called her a fallen daughter. For a moment, her heart ached, then she tore it down. "They don't get to define me anymore." Back at the apartment, she spread the notebook across the table. Plans, ideas, names scrawled in shaky handwriting. "We can't fight them alone," she said. "We need more voices, more protection. People who know the cost of silence." The reporter nodded, pulling out his phone. Calls were made, messages sent. By nightfall, the room filled with strangers, activists, lawyers, journalists, even a former employee from one of the family's companies. Each had scars, each carried stories of injustice. Together, they became something more than individuals. They became an army. Her hands trembled as she stood before them. "I'm not asking you to fight for me," she said. "I'm asking you to fight with me, because this isn't just my story, it's all of ours." The room erupted in agreement. Eyes that once held doubt now glimmered with fire. For the first time, she didn't feel alone. She felt surrounded by a force larger than fear. Days turned into nights of planning. Documents were organized, stories cross-checked, strategies built. They didn't just want to expose corruption anymore, they wanted to dismantle it. Brick by brick, lie by lie, her energy returned. The girl who once hid in a motel, hollow and broken, now moved with purpose. Every step was heavy with determination. Every word carried weight. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was leading, but danger never slept. One evening, while leaving a meeting, she noticed the car again, black, polished, waiting. Instead of shrinking, she stopped, staring it down. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the car drove off, a message, perhaps. A reminder that the enemy was still watching. Her heart pounded, but she smiled faintly. "Let them watch," she whispered. "They'll see what's coming." The group's first move was bold. They scheduled a live broadcast, unfiltered and unstoppable, streamed across platforms where no single hand could silence it. Lawyers checked the files, reporters verified sources, activists prepared statements. The world would hear them. The night before the broadcast, fear crept in again. She sat by the window, watching the city lights blare. Her hands shook, her stomach twisted. "What if they're right?" she whispered to the reporter. "What if I'm not strong enough for this?" He looked at her with steady eyes. "Strength isn't about never breaking. It's about breaking and standing back up. And you stood up more times than anyone I've ever known." Her eyes filled with tears. For the first time in weeks, the weight in her chest lightened. Not gone, but bearable, because she wasn't carrying it alone anymore. As dawn broke, she stood in front of the mirror. Her reflection was tired, scarred, but alive. She touched the glass, whispering, "You're not the girl in the veil anymore. You're something stronger." When the camera lights finally turned on, and the world tuned in, she took a deep breath, ready to speak, not as a victim, not as a pawn, but as a voice too loud to be silenced. The rising had begun. The room was dim except for the glow of the cameras. A microphone stood in front of her like a challenge. Around her, the group whispered final checks, lawyers reviewing notes, activists scrolling through feeds, the reporter studying the stream. Once it began, there would be no pause button, no turning back. Her palms were damp, her throat tight. For weeks, she had been hunted, broken, rebuilt, and now the moment had arrived. She adjusted the microphone, staring into the unblinking eye of the camera. Somewhere out there, millions of eyes stared back. The red light blinked on. "Live." She drew a breath and began. "For too long, silence has been bought with fear. For too long, power has crushed truth beneath its feet. Tonight, I will no longer whisper. Tonight, I will speak." Her voice wavered at first, but steadied as she laid out the files, bank transfers, property records, evidence of stolen wealth. She spoke names with precision, names the public once respected, names that now dripped with betrayal. The screen split as documents flashed across it, undeniable proof that the families had built empires on ashes. Viewers gasped, comments flooded in, hashtags exploded. The story was no longer just hers, it belonged to everyone watching. Halfway through, her phone buzzed. A message scrolled across the screen. "End this now, or pay the price." She glanced at it, then raised her eyes back to the camera. "They told me to be quiet. They told me the price of truth is too high. But the price of silence is higher." Her words cut like glass. For the first time, she didn't tremble when speaking. She didn't shrink from the weight of their threats. She owned her voice. Then, chaos erupted. One of the family's lawyers barged into the room, shouting that the broadcast was illegal, waving papers. But the group locked the doors, cameras still rolling. Every second of his outburst was caught live, exposing desperation more loudly than any file could. Her pulse raced, but she didn't stop. She leaned closer to the microphone. "You are watching history, not mine ours." They thought power made them untouchable, but tonight proves power belongs to the people who refuse to be silenced. Viewers doubled, then tripled. Screens in bars, cafes, living rooms, even classrooms tuned in. Strangers gathered, watching in silence, then erupting in cheers or tears. The broadcast had escaped their control. It was bigger than her, bigger than the family's. By the time she finished, her voice was hoarse, her body trembling. She closed the files, looked into the lens, and whispered, "You tried to bury me. But you forgot I am the seed." The feed cut. Silence filled the room. For a moment, no one moved. Then the reporter laughed, shaky but victorious. "It's out. They can't put it back." But victory came with fear. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a photo of her apartment door, painted with a red X. A warning, a promise, the families weren't done. Her chest tightened, but instead of shrinking, she straightened. The world had seen too much now. Threats no longer silenced her, they only confirmed she was winning. That night, as the city erupted with noise, cheers, protests, sirens, she stood at the window, whispering to herself, "The veil is gone. Now they'll see me for who I really am." And the war, once hidden in shadows, was now raging in the light. The morning after the broadcast, the city didn't wake up, it roared. Newspapers splashed her face across their front pages. News anchors replayed her words on endless loops. Strangers on buses whispered her name with awe or disgust. She had become a storm, but storms invite lightning. The first strike came swiftly. The activist who had stood by her during the broadcast was arrested at dawn, accused of inciting violence during protests. The charge was false, but the handcuffs were real. Cameras filmed the arrest, framing it as justice instead of revenge. By noon, the smear campaign intensified. A new wave of articles painted her as a fraud, claiming the documents she revealed were fabricated. Photoshopped images spread across feeds, showing her parting with politicians she had never met, kissing men she had never known. Lies moved faster than truth. Her allies scrambled to respond, but every time they corrected one rumor, 3 more appeared. "This is coordinated," the reporter muttered, scanning his screen. "They're not just attacking you, they're dismantling us." Then the lawsuits multiplied, not one, but dozens. Corporations, banks, even charities tied to the families filed claims against her. The weight of paperwork alone was enough to crush. It wasn't about winning, it was about exhausting her. But the cruelest blow came that evening. A fire broke out in the office where they had stored backup files. Flames devoured cabinets, hard drives, every trace of evidence they had collected. She stood in the street, smoke stinging her eyes, watching years of truth turn to ash. "Accident," the fire chief said flatly, though his eyes betrayed him. She knew better. This wasn't fire. This was erasure. Her chest tightened with rage, but also fear. Her allies were breaking. The former employee who had testified vanished, phone disconnected, apartment emptied. The lawyer who had volunteered legal aid withdrew suddenly, citing family emergencies. One by one, the circle shrank. The reporter tried to stay strong, but exhaustion carved lines into his face. "They're bleeding us out," he whispered one night. "Piece by piece, until there's nothing left." His voice cracked not with doubt, but with despair. She wanted to reassure him, to say they would endure. But even she felt the cracks forming inside her chest. The families had money, power, influence. All she had was truth, and truth was bleeding. Then came the most chilling strike of all. A video surfaced online, grainy, but clear enough. It showed her walking at night, alone, unaware. A voice whispered over the footage, "We see you." Her blood ran cold. Privacy was gone. Safety was gone. Even shadows betrayed her now. She locked herself in her apartment, curtains drawn, but the fear followed her into every corner. The city outside was louder than ever, protests, clashes, chants echoing her name. But inside, her world shrank to whispers and dread. The counterattack wasn't just aimed at her reputation or her freedom. It was aimed at her very sense of existence. Yet even as fear wrapped its claws around her, another truth lingered. If they were fighting this viciously, it meant they were bleeding. The harder they struck, the closer she was to breaking them. She pressed her palms against the table, voice trembling but steady. "They think they can erase me. But all they're doing is proving my story." Her allies were fewer now. The fire had burned their files, The lawsuits drained their strength, and fear stalked their every step, but she wasn't ready to fold, not yet, because deep down, she knew, the more brutal the counterattack, the closer the empire was to collapsing. And if she could endure this storm, she just might live to see it fall. She hadn't left her apartment in 3 days. The curtain stayed closed, the lights dim, her phone switched off except for rare moments when she checked to see if the world had forgotten her. It hadn't. Her name still trended, her face still circled every feed, half idolized, half demonized. Loneliness crept in like smoke. Her allies were scattered, silenced, or afraid. Even the reporter, once her uncheckable partner, had gone quiet. She wondered if he had finally broken under the weight. She couldn't blame him if he had. But then, on the 4th night, her phone buzzed, a message, unknown number. Just 3 words, check your window. Her heart jumped into her throat. Fear first, instinct second. She hesitated, then pulled the curtain back just an inch, and there it was spray-painted across the wall opposite her building in bold red letters. We believe you. The message wasn't signed. But the handwriting looked messy, rushed, almost desperate. Not the work of a professional movement, just ordinary hands, claiming space in the dark. Her eyes stung as she whispered to the silence, I'm not alone. The next morning, she dared to step outside. Cautious, hoodie pulled low, every sense alert. She expected stares, whispers, maybe even stones. But instead, a woman selling bread at the corner slipped her an extra loaf without a word. A taxi driver refused her fare with a quiet nod. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered, that's her. It wasn't everyone. It wasn't even most, but it was enough. Enough to remind her that truth didn't live only in files and broadcasts, it lived in people's hearts. Later that day, the reporter returned. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes rumpled, but his spirit sparked. He dropped a folder on her table. They thought they burned everything, he said, voice hoarse, but they missed something. Inside the folder were copies, old, faded, but intact. Documents a retired clerk had secretly kept, knowing one day someone might need them. Proof the families had buried for decades. Not everything, but enough to reignite the fire. Her hands trembled as she held the papers. Why would he risk this? She asked. The reporter smiled weakly, because he said your courage reminded him of the daughter he lost. Said he couldn't stay silent anymore. For the first time in weeks, her chest lifted with something other than dread. Hope wasn't a flood, it was a spark, small, fragile, but alive. That night, she stood on her balcony, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere in the streets below, strangers were whispering her name, not with scorn, but with solidarity. Somewhere, old men who once spouted power were deciding silence had grown too heavy. Somewhere, the truth she thought had burned was rising from ash. The fear hadn't vanished, the families were still strong, still ruthless, still watching. But for the first time since the counterattack began, she realized something vital. They weren't the only ones with power. And maybe, just maybe, her story was no longer hers alone.